All right, so this week I want to talk about glutathione and the importance of glutathione. And you might remember that recently I did an interview with Dr. Naim Patel, who's a doctor of pharmacy in California, who had a breakthrough discovery or figured out a novel way to deliver glutathione and liposomes topically. And if you remember back to that video, that interview, the key to his product is that it raises red blood cell levels versus plasma levels. All glutathione products raise plasma levels. He said that his was the first to raise red blood cell levels. And so that would be one reason to use his, because raising red blood cell levels, that's intracellular level, and that has a much greater impact on the body to raise it intracellularly versus just in the extracellular compartment. So I want to remind you of that, because today, you know, the raising of the red blood cell level is one big reason why we wanted you to be aware of his product. But I found a study that looks at liposomal glutathione levels orally that also raises red blood cell levels. And for those of you who have worked with me in the past and taken glutathione from me, this study is specifically on that product that you took. So it's extra cool. And this happened in 2018. So actually it's been raising red blood cell levels and intracellular levels for years. And for all my patients, I just didn't know that the study was there proving it. So obviously I knew it was working because we're getting benefits with people all over the world with it. But the cool thing is you don't have to necessarily buy, you're not held to just the topical product from Dr. Patel, even though his is awesome. But it's nice that this does the same thing, because this one, from a price perspective, is much more sustainable to use over the long term versus that topical product. But you could still use the topical product for certain applications where topical matters versus systemic increase of glutathione orally. So that's the super take-home summary statement, is that product, you can raise intracellular glutathione with oral supplementation. And this study proves that. This study, you know, basically took healthy adults and it gave them oral liposomal glutathione at 500 milligrams or 1,000 milligrams per day. And it wanted to see, how does that impact glutathione levels in whole blood, in red blood cells, in the plasma, and in white blood cells, so in our immune cells. And what they found, what they found is that it raises all those levels. So you can see here, glutathione levels were elevated after 1 week at 40% elevated in the whole blood, 25% intracellular in the red blood cells, 28% in the plasma, and 100% in the white blood cells. And by raising it in the blood cells, it increased natural killer cell cytotoxicity by up to 400%. That's important because natural killer cells are the main antiviral, anti-cancer, anti-infection cells of our immune system, of the innate side of the immune system. And it also increased lymphocyte proliferation up to 60%. So lymphocyte is a general term for our white blood cells, our CD4s, our CD8s. Different classes of white blood cells. So if your white blood cells proliferate more effectively, right, then when you have that infection, they're going to wake up, spread out, go find things more effectively. So the glutathione for a month at both doses increased the lymphocyte proliferation. So that is awesome, because as we've talked about on multiple videos over time, you can check out the channel to see those. Glutathione is the body's master antioxidant. It's key for liver detoxification, and it's key for promoting that antiviral, anti-cancer defense. So that's great to see, and that's specifically with the product that I use all the time with my people. So that's great. Now, we're raising intracellular levels. So let's review some things that glutathione does. Other areas besides just the natural killer cell cytotoxicity and as the master antioxidant. Here's a study from 2019 looking at glutathione as a biofilm disruptor. And not only that, but improving antibiotic efficacy. So if you take glutathione while on antibiotic therapy, glutathione is helping break down the biofilms that the bacteria you're trying to kill make to protect themselves and make the antibiotics less effective. So using glutathione helps break down those biofilms and inhibit the growth of the bacterium or bacteria. So that's huge. Another function of glutathione. Glutathione primes T cells for inflammation. So it's not needed for T cell activation, but it promotes T cell growth. So in the context of infection, in last week's video, we talked about testing for T cells, right? And seeing T cell immunity. And we looked at studies that said T cell immunity testing is more sensitive for natural immunity than antibody testing is. And T cells, you might remember we talked about, if you have an infection, say you have an intracellular viral infection, let's use Epstein-Barr virus as an example. That cell is infected with Epstein-Barr virus, antibodies to Epstein-Barr virus, paint a big red X on that cell and mark it for destruction. It's the T cells that go recognize the cells with X's on them and actually do the killing. So glutathione promotes T cell priming or T cell metabolism and growth to go be more effective assassins so that the Epstein-Barr gets taken care of, or whichever virus we're talking about. Glutathione and brain disorders. Okay, this study says glutathione depletion and glutathione enzyme deficits are involved in the pathology of brain disorders such as autism, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's. There's been many studies in humans with neurodegenerative and neuropsychiatric disorders that have demonstrated altered levels of glutathione. So glutathione depletion can lead to the abnormalities seen in these diseases and in abnormalities in methylation and in mitochondrial function. Well, mitochondrial function is how we produce ATP, which is energy we need to heal. So glutathione's key in those areas. So they say glutathione plays an important role during the onset and progression of neuropsychiatric and neurodegenerative diseases. Glutathione redox imbalance may be a primary cause of these disorders and may be used as a biomarker for diagnosis of these diseases. So, I mean, that's a heavy sentence right there. Glutathione imbalance or deficits could be a primary cause of neurodegeneration like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, or of autism, schizophrenia, and bipolar. Like that's a weighty sentence. And glutathione levels can be used as a biomarker for diagnosis of these things. So, you know, out there's idiopathic Parkinson's. Idiopathic means we don't know why it's caused. In my book, I talk about idiopathic and, you know, doctors that use that term as idiopaths, you know, which is not a far stretch from idiot. That's not a personal jab at anyone in general, but at the system, because labeling something idiopathic and moving on isn't helping the person at all. And it's basically like you're throwing up your hand saying, we don't know, and we don't really care to look further. Well, conventional medicine, if you asked a neurologist, you know, that person has idiopathic Parkinson's, could glutathione imbalance be a driver of that? It's very, very unlikely they're going to say no way and not be aware of this research. But hey, if it's idiopathic and nothing that you're typically used to diagnose the disease is being found, why don't we look here? And it's well known, well, it's not well known in general, but the research has firmly established that N-Acetylcysteine helps improve Parkinson's patients and dopamine signaling and everything. So N-Acetylcysteine is a key precursor to glutathione production. Perhaps one mechanism of NAC's benefit in Parkinson's is actually restoring glutathione status in those people. So if you've got a neurodegenerative or neuropsychiatric issue, getting your glutathione levels, according to these authors in this study, could be key in helping understand how to best support you. So those are those are studies looking at multiple uses for glutathione, and those studies span detox, span viral infections, span neurodegenerative disease. And we didn't look at studies with it, but it also has roles in cancer and heart disease and pretty much any disease, because it's our body's master antioxidant. If our oxidative stress gets out of hand, that promotes rusting metaphorically and tissue damage and inflammation. And now you're on the highway to whatever your weakest link is. So we want to know your glutathione status and make sure that it's optimal. If we go down and look at the data, the data doesn't really support, and these were healthy people, which healthy in the research doesn't really mean healthy as we would describe it, but let's assume they were healthy, okay, absent chronic disease and that sort of thing. Well, then this literature doesn't support taking the 1,000. You know, if we look at all these tables, the 500 is the light gray, the 1,000 is the, you know, the cross-hatched one. And so the 500, as far as raising whole blood levels, the 500 did better, okay? Raising red blood cell levels, the 1,000 did better. But, you know, if you look at the 2-week mark, they're about the same, okay? If we go to changes in plasma, the 500 did much better. Changes in your white blood cells, the 500 did better, okay? So then if we look at reducing oxidative stress, there's 2 ways to look at it. There's glutathione recycling, where the 1,000 did better for that, but the decrease in actual oxidative stress marker or free radical marker here, the 8-isoprostane, the 500 did better. And then promoting optimal lymphocyte proliferation, the 1,000 was better at that, but raising your natural killer cells, the 500 was better. So this is a small study. They're moving forward with doing a larger group of people and really narrowing these numbers in more, but you know, 500 appears to be plenty for the general healthy population, and that'll, you know, you'll get double the life out of the product if you're taking 1 dose instead of 2 a day. And I've heard from other sources that your body's only going to absorb 500 at a time. So if you were going to do the 1,000, you want to do 500 a.m., 500 p.m., not 1,000 all at once.
That was my question. So it's like you're flooding your engine. It's just too much. You just can't absorb it.
Yeah, there's some sort of you know, saturation point, and so it'd be essentially you're wasting it, right? And,
right.
And that's not, you know, we don't want to waste anything, but especially this, right? So you'd want to do morning and evening doses.
So Dr. Patel's is topical.
Yeah.
So how does the body take glutathione through the skin topically, as opposed to when you take NAC or glutathione by capsule? I mean, I don't know, explain that to me.
Yeah, so if you take a capsular glutathione,
right,
that's going to the gut and being broken down, and really what's happening is it's going to break the glutathione down into glutamine, glycine, and cysteine, and then it has to be recombined into glutathione and sent, you know, wherever it's going. And that's assuming, you know, there's, back in the day, there were studies saying oral glutathione is useless because it doesn't raise systemic levels, because we studied healthy adults. But, you know, your average healthy adult has GI issues, right? So was it not really impacting the system, or did those healthy adults have GI issues where it's being used up at the GI and never gets to go to the system, right? Because you've got intestinal permeability or dysbiosis or ulcers or polyps or, you know, whatever. So the oral has to be broken down and recombined and sent somewhere, assuming you didn't use it all. That's oral capsule. The oral liposomal, you know, I have you take it, hold it in your mouth at least 30 seconds. Why? Liposomes are fat molecules that the glutathione is stored inside, and the liposome is a fat molecule. As you're holding it in your mouth, it's jumping in your bloodstream and your oral mucosa and hitting the system right away. versus having to go to the GI, be broken down, reassembled, and sent back. So the liposomal can jump into the bloodstream right where it's at, whether we're putting it on topically or holding it in our mouth for some time. And so when you apply it topically, that's why, and you may have seen this with other lotions, they'll say, you know, put it in your elbow pit or behind your knees or on your abdomen, because those are highly vascular areas where, you know, it can be absorbed better versus putting it on your hairy forearm or, you know, some other less vascular spot.
Okay.
You know, bottom of the feet is good as well. But most people put socks on and go walk around. So elbow pits, knee, backs of your knees, and abdomen are the top three. If you have thyroid issues, you know, right over the thyroid on the neck would be a good one as well. Any other questions or comments on
So
this?
everything from this study had to do with it increased over several weeks, your levels.
Yep. So in some cases it was the first week. It depends on what we were looking at. So it was a 4-week study. So it all happened relatively fast. But so like the peak in the whole blood was at 2 weeks. The peak in the red blood cell was at 2 weeks. Basically for all the, so the peak in the plasma, the peak in the white blood cell was at 2 weeks. You could argue 2 to 4 weeks for the 500 group here. But the reduction in, or the improvement in glutathione recycling occurred in the first week, especially in the 1,000 group. The peak free radical or antioxidant effect, at least on isoprostane, was at 2 weeks. You know, the peak lymphocyte proliferation was the first week with the 500 group, the second week with the 1,000 group. The peak natural killer cell was for both of them at the 2-week mark. So it depends on what we're measuring, but essentially for almost all of them by 2 weeks, you're getting there.